Ashok. So let me introduce Ashok Willis. He's a renewable energy and energy efficiency engineer. He holds a BSc Engineering, Mechanical and Mechatronics Engineering honours from the University of Cape Town, and MEC Engineering and Policy Analysis that he got cum laude from Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands. Ashok is passionate about realizing the just energy transition and therefore has interests in both the technological as well as the socio-economic aspect of renewable energy. So Ashok, we're looking forward to your presentation. So if you're ready, just share and I'll confirm if we can hear you.
Hi, good morning, everyone.
We can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, great.
And we see your presentation.
Okay, no, excellent. Thanks, everyone, and thank you for the introduction, Andres. So welcome to my presentation on investigating the net employment impacts of renewable energy in South Africa. I'm at IX Engineers, but this research originally comes from my master's thesis, which I completed at Delft University of Technology last year, and I have some assistance from the Institute for Economic Justice. So to set the scene for where this problem lies is between two parallel crises in the 21st century. So on the one hand, there's a widespread broad climate change crisis, which I think we're all aware of, but there's also a widespread socio-economic crisis. You know, inequality and poverty is still widespread throughout the world. And the dilemma is that there's a potential solution to the climate change crisis, which is an energy transition. But what is unclear is how the energy transition might impact the socio-economic crisis. We don't know how the energy transition will impact human rights, poverty alleviation, or employment. And that's where I focus on this research, is to specifically look at employment, but it is just one part of looking at the just energy transition, which there's the definition below, or one of the definitions, which is where justice and equity is incorporated into the decarbonization of the global energy supply. So I see this as a systems problem, that because anything that involves a just energy transition, I think, has to be a systems problem. So my main research question, which was, what are the possible net employment effects of South Africa's transition from coal to wind and solar forms of electricity generation? So for scoping reasons, I only looked at the electricity sector and only looked at wind and solar forms of electricity generation. That's because those are the two forms of renewable energy that are growing the fastest in South Africa. And then when looking at the net employment effects, what we did was look at the jobs gained from wind and solar, and then also look at the jobs lost from coal. What are the different methods that have been used? So they basically came to three different modeling methods where people have addressed this kind of question in the past. And I'll go through them all quite quickly. And so the one is the computational general equilibrium modeling methods, which is great in the sense that it can calculate the net effects, and there's some dynamic relationships there that you can model. But there are also some cons in the sense that they tend to make neoclassical assumptions, particularly of full employment and perfectly competitive markets, which makes them tricky, I think, in a South African context. And there are very few models with restricted access and some modeling assumptions that can be hard to identify. Then on the other hand, there are analytical methods that tend to be survey-based. Pros are that they're, less computationally expensive and can be good in low data situations. However, they can only calculate the direct effects and partial indirect effects, but no induced effects. So it's not a very data-driven modeling method. And then there's the method that we used, which was an input-output analysis, which is a demand model, which sees how a change in final demand can change the demand and employment. And the real star of the show with this method is that it can calculate the direct, indirect, and induced effects. It's transparent, there are no hidden neoclassical assumptions, and it has been reputable and been used by several authors around the world. There are some cons though, and that it has fixed industrial structures and no supply side constraints. I think what would be great, it would be great to chat to someone maybe afterwards about how to incorporate more systems thinking and systems dynamics into an input-output analysis, but I think that's a different topic. So then if we look into the definitions of jobs, and to use the electricity sector as an example, direct jobs would be people who are working in the energy sector as technicians at a power plant, for example. And then the indirect jobs would be people working in other sectors further along the value chain that are demanded by the electricity and gas sector, such as in coal mining. And then the induced jobs would be the jobs created through an increase in household earnings from the direct and indirect effects. So for example, jobs created in a supermarket because now coal miners and Eskom workers now have the means to money on something, and now they can spend it on groceries. And then when we look at the net effects, basically what we would do is go look at the induced indirect and direct effects on both the job creation side, so the gross jobs, and then looked at the same direct, indirect, and induced effects on the displacement side for the jobs that would be displaced, and then the difference between the two would be the net employment effects. So then the model that was used was the International Jobs and Economic Development Impacts Model, or IJDI. This is an open source model that uses an input-output analysis, but there were some changes made. So for one, the IJDI could only could only calculate gross employment effects. So there was no vector for displacement, so that was incorporated. And then they had some outdated data, so that was all updated. The number of sectors that were analyzed, instead of 33, went to 91, and the data used to calculate the number of jobs, instead of using average wages, we also looked at it in a more disaggregated sense of skilled, semi-skilled, low-skilled, and informal work. So we only ran 2 scenarios for this particular study, and one was to follow the IRP, or the Integrated Resource Plan, for 2019, and the different data that we could find for that. And then there was another scenario, which was an ambitious solar and wind scenario, where everything was basically expanded, and the more solar and wind deployment, increased localization, and then creating a small market for wind and solar exports. So having a look at the results, the total jobs for the period for 2019 to 2030, the net direct, net indirect, and net induced effects together for the IRP 2019 scenario came to 1.14 million, and then the ambitious solar and wind scenario that came to 2.7 million. I think, this is not a predictive model, so I mean, I don't think the numbers should be taken too literally, but it's just more about looking at how the system changes, and to know that there would be potentially gross employment effect, net employment benefits. So when we look at the results, and then this was, now what we did was we normalized it, so we did jobs per gigawatt hour, and then for the construction phase, what we can see is that the jobs that could be created through construction, both in terms of direct, indirect, and induced effects for all the different scenarios, were all net positive. So basically all the construction jobs for wind and solar seem to be creating more jobs than what would be lost in operations and maintenance at coal-fired power plants for the construction phase. When we look at the operations and maintenance phase, what we can see is that when it comes to comparing, the operations and maintenance phase, the big thing here is that the indirect and induced effects are negative in the IRP 2019 scenario, and that's because the coal and electricity industry in South Africa is so well established, and they are like many parts of the value chain are present in South Africa, and the whole communities that have been created around different coal regions, etc. So the induced effects are also really high. So what this shows is that, for the IRP 2019 scenario, the operations and maintenance phase looks to be net negative effects, but then in the accelerated solar and wind scenario, these would be positive effects. And then, but this really shows the possible benefits that could come from increased localization, because the expanded capacity doesn't have an impact on the per gigawatt hour basis. We also had a look at employee skills at the different sectors, and one of the main findings was that the building of complete construction sector would be one of the most stimulated sectors in the energy transition. And what was interesting about this sector is that there are high levels of informal and low-skilled work, which both presents an opportunity and a threat. On the one hand, there's an opportunity because South Africa has a lot of unemployment, so there's the opportunity to absorb the unemployed and get them included in the energy transition. But there's also a threat in the sense that there's a lot of casual and informal work that happens in the construction sector, and a lot of the jobs aren't necessarily the best jobs. And then when you compare that to the electricity and gas sector and the coal sectors on the right, well, you can see here that there are high levels of semi-skilled and skilled workers in those sectors. So that does present a challenge on how we investigate that. But then we also looked at, if you take out the construction sector, what opportunities could there be for people in the electricity and gas and coal sectors? And what we found is that, well, across many other different industries that would be stimulated, there would also be a high demand for semi-skilled and skilled work. That's not to say that just because you are skilled in one sector, you can easily transfer and work in another sector. No, that's not the purpose of this study. This is more about saying, okay, if these conditions are met, and this is what the demand could be in these different sectors, and looking into the how is something for a later study, I think. So implications for policy. So the policy implications for creating new jobs in the construction sector, as I said, a high level of unskilled and informal workers. So we can look at formalizing the construction sector when it comes to how we employ workers and train them. Technical and vocational educational programs have proven to be effective around the world. Local content requirements are an option. This is a touchy one because local content requirements are very complex, and it's also, from a systems perspective, many unintended consequences that come from local content requirements. I just listed here as one of the policy levers that are available, but I think, that really needs to be investigated further. And then also the removal of unnecessary regulatory burdens is important to get small companies involved in the energy transition, as well as stakeholder engagement. And then for those who will lose in the energy transition, we saw that in the energy, coal mining, and auxiliary transport look to be the sectors that are most threatened. So we need to look at things such as re-employment and training subsidies, early retirement, social protection, and public employment programs. These are some examples. So in terms of recommendations, I think it would be good to compare the results to actual numbers in terms of perhaps an industry survey. As I mentioned earlier, we only looked at the electricity sector, so we don't look at the energy transition in terms of broader options, such as looking at transforming the transport sector. I think we also need to start looking into the geography and the location of employment. And then I think also to incorporate some more systems thinking into the input-output analysis and start having some more feedbacks and trying to figure out how we can incorporate that how for some of these other policy levers that have been made, how that would, something like local content requirements, while you can potentially increase local content, it can have a bunch of other effects, such as increasing the cost of the whole system, and then it's no longer a business case. So those are some of the challenges that I think need to be solved. And then back to the dilemma. So in the initial study, there were also some stakeholder engagements and some we had some interviews, and one of them came from a workshop that we had, and then one of the union members put up his hand and he said, "Oh, well, what is more harmful, climate change or hunger?" For me, that really resonated. It was quite a powerful statement that he made. And yeah, I think it shows that it's a lot of privilege when it comes to kind of discussing and trying to solve these problems from the positions that we're in. But I think it also, there's a lesson here that doesn't have, or hopefully there doesn't have to be a binary decision, one or the other. And I think the just energy transition has the opportunity to make it, having a look at the system more broadly and not just as a technical issue, to be a situation where, there could be more justice in the way that we move forward. Anyway, thanks very much. if you have any questions or would like to discuss some things further, here's my email address, or I forgot to put my cell phone number there. But thanks very much. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much, Ashok. I think the work that you did is quite vital importance, in South Africa, but I think also for the developing world, where employment is a big issue, poverty. I think we heard earlier from Greg as well that poverty is a big issue, and we don't want to do a transition where we heap more hurt on people who are already struggling. We've got time for one question or comment. Is there any? I don't see any hands or anything in the chat. There is a hand, Greg.
Yes, thank you, Ashok. A very interesting presentation, and yes, Andries, you made a pertinent comment. Just something about a comment and then just a question. I'm assuming there's about 1 million actual employers in the coal mining business. That's my gut feel. I'm not too sure, but it'd be about, it could be more. Of course, the addition would add on, but I'm just talking about direct. The question is, in this transition period, and I think it's critical. I don't think it's, we're talking about classical management there. It's not one or the other. I think it's both. And the transition period is a process of moving towards two. And I think that's critical because, as Ashok, you spoke about, social implications, poverty, education, and the complexity. And it's very interesting in the work that I did when I was in Germany and looked at the sudden transition into, they have 40,000 megawatts of solar, just to let you know. It's what almost Eskom is totally. Huge problems, unintended consequences, because you found that people in the coal mining industry and the nuclear industry moved. And now the unintended consequences of what we see in terms of the geopolitical situation, instability, they have a huge problem because they don't have the expertise and the personnel to manage. So I think energy transition is not a simple, it's and in both. It's not just one or the other. And I think we need to carefully, particularly in developing countries, Andries, as that you spoke about, we need to consider very carefully the process of how we do it, because it's fundamental to our competitiveness as a country that we do it right. It's not about just getting money from the Europeans and think we're going to make things happen. I think it's far deeper than that. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment, Greg. So Ashok, once again, thank you very much for the presentation. And yes, please contact us, drop us a mail. I'd be very interested in seeing how we can add systems thinking and system dynamics to this particular problem, because it is a reality and we need to look into the future. So thank you.